Hey there. My conversation with Katie in this episode was so good. I just knew she had more to say. So I asked Dana and Katie to stick around after the episode to have an extended conversation. Let's listen.
Katie, when we were broadcasting live, you had my brain firing on all cylinders, and you said that we are going to be in 10, 15, 20 years really living in this epidemic of people who are detransitioning because they tried so hard to feel more comfortable in their skin and fix something inside of them by changing the outside of their bodies. I wonder, could we talk? I have a couple questions. Can we talk about that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
Let's do
so
it.
first of all, we want to rescue as many of them as we can from that experience. So we've got to figure out how to talk to today's high school and college age students that are in the middle of all of this conversation. Do you see that girls are more impacted than boys in this area right now?
That's what the data is bearing out, is that it's very disproportionate, more so among natal females, so biological girls, than it is among natal males. And sociologists have been scratching their heads to try to understand why that is. And
Mm-hmm.
much of it is socially influenced. You might have heard this phrase, social contagion. And it's
Mm.
the idea that behaviors, attitudes, feelings, they sort of catch on and spread to other people. But what these researchers are also finding is that for many of these young women, gender dysphoria, that feeling that one's body and gender are misaligned, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times it's either a coping mechanism or it's kind of a symptom of something else. And when these young people get the help that they need for
Mm.
whatever that something else is, and it may be something that they've never even talked about, when that happens, a lot of times the gender dysphoria, it sort of works itself out, or they
Yeah.
recognize that they were kind of fixating on that as a way to try to express distress or pain over something else that was
Mm-hmm.
going on in a different area of life.
Yeah. None of us feel like we fit in our skin in middle school and high school.
Oh,
So
goodness.
it wouldn't take
Right.
much to be like, well, maybe this is the problem. Um, I, I think it was until about 2012, transgenderism was predominantly only a male problem. It was very uncommon for it to be a female
Mhm.
problem. And now we're seeing that it disproportionately affects high school girls and college age
Right.
girls. So those sociologists you were talking about, those researchers were getting really intellectually honest and saying, why is there suddenly this big uptick? What do you
Yeah.
think is the most important thing that we can communicate to those girls when they're in that period of confusion? What do we need to do to help them, first of all and foremost, I think, understand their pain point and then maybe understand their gender?
One of the best things to do from all the research I found is to keep asking critical questions, having that
Mm-hmm.
young girl engage intellectually about some things of how long have you felt this way? What makes you say this? What makes you feel this way? And a lot of times, what comes out is perhaps they just feel like they don't fit in with the way it seems like other girls in their class do. So you may have a girl who just doesn't call herself a girly girl. And
Mm,
to affirm that God made her as an individual. What it
yeah.
means to be a woman is to be a female created in the image of God. That doesn't mean you need to fit in with certain cultural expectations of liking certain colors or clothes. Be who God made you to be. And as
Yeah.
we align with who God made us to be, we're going to fulfill what it means to be a woman. And so asking those critical questions is really helpful.
Hmm.
And there was a Christian family out in California, and California school policies are really pushing this onto children. But their daughter, who came from a very theologically solid, spiritually mature
Hmm.
home, suddenly said that she didn't believe she was a girl, and her family kind of, well, they removed her from that environment. They pulled her out of the school and recentered on family relationships, helping build those family ties, asking her
Mm.
critical questions, and she eventually realigned her self-perception with the body that God gave her. But one of the things that kind of triggered, if you like, that self-perception confusion was she saw other girls in her class that were her age dressed in a very sexually provocative way, and she
Ah,
didn't identify with that, and that was a good
yeah,
thing. But by
right.
not wanting to dress the way that her peers did, it gave opportunity for just that one little lie, that one little confusion to sort of grow and sprout,
Yeah.
if you like. And so many of these things might begin with very small lies, small misperceptions. And then the other thing we can't fail to mention, Dana, is I've lost count of how many young girls identify as non binary or transgender,
Hmm.
and it's a form of psychological survival. There could be abuse, there could be bullying, there could be sexual harassment. A
Yeah,
lot of
it's
times it is
sometimes a form
something
of
to fit.
psychological survival.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
And we don't
yeah,
want to say automatically that there's abuse, but there are
right.
there are many cases where perhaps it's something that some type of traumatic experience that they grow and try to say, well, how to make sense of this? Perhaps if I were a boy, this wouldn't have happened to me. And so we don't immediately need to
Right.
go there, but just to
Hmm.
be aware that there could be something similar to like an eating disorder or another form
Yeah.
of really self-harm, which is what a lot of these treatments are.
One of the things I hear you saying is how important it is to affirm the child in the way that they are female. If your daughter likes dressing like a tomboy, if your daughter likes hunting with her dad, or if your daughter likes driving trucks, like that isn't what the Bible says makes us distinctively female or male, those things. And so we don't have to be afraid of that. We don't have to be fearful about it. We can affirm the unique kind of girl that she is. Is that important, you think?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely. It's very important to separate what the Bible says and what culture says.
Yes, because we add the culture and the church, says the girl wearing pink, add all kinds of expectations that are very, very extra biblical. We have to be very careful about that and have a really intellectually honest conversation. Um, Are any other thoughts about the important things that we should be telling those girls as they struggle? Let me say this. I just was thinking of the Atlantic, which is not a bastion of conservative writing um, by any means. Uh, Featured an article about a girl they called Claire, who, this was not a Christian family. This wasn't written from a Christian perspective, but she was really having some gender dysphoria and wanted to transition. And they said, you can dress any way you want, but until you fill this journal with all the thoughts about everything that's discouraging you, you can't do anything significant to transition yourself. And by the time that non-Christian girl in a non-Christian family got through that journal, she had figured out, as you said a moment ago, what was really bothering her, and it had nothing to do with
Yeah.
being male or female, and she was able to
Yeah.
resolve it. So I think a lot of times if we can just be patient, some of that
Yes.
dysphoria and discontent about ourselves works itself out, but that is not what generally is prescribed. Usually in just a few visits, someone will start to get the medical care that they need to begin to transition. So, would
Yeah.
you prescribe patience?
Oh, absolutely. And also to recognize that, especially if the child hasn't gone through puberty yet, the about a decade or two ago, they practiced something called watchful waiting. And these were secular psychologists and therapists. And watchful waiting just said, let's not make any decisions, certainly no decisions that would have lasting effects. And
Yeah.
it was something like the conservative estimate was about 80% of children grew out of it once they hit puberty. And that really is just the goodness of God's created design, that once the body hits a point of maturity, hormones and changes take over and inform our sense of self and also how we
Yeah.
relate to other people as a man or a woman. And
Right.
keep in mind too, gender perception, it's very relationally formed. And so the family relationships are a vital part. This is why we see people when they want to transition, they want to be what's called passing or passable, because they're looking for that confirmation from
Mm,
someone else to confirm the identity that they want to be, their preferred gender. And so this is also why, speaking very young, why children seeing perhaps a man with a beard in a dress, there was something like that recently that was circulating. It's confusing because
mm-hmm.
it's these are relationally formed concepts, and so you're introducing children to things that are say, well, why would a man be wearing a dress? And so it just
Yeah.
introduces them to confusion. And then always to keep in mind, and I'm not a mother. The way I say it is I'm not a mother, and so I'm able to go down the rabbit hole for these moms who are raising little ones, and it's like I'll do all the research and try to present it in a way that connects. But the younger, and as you said, that age appropriate way, so wonderful that you wrote a book on this to address this very
Mm,
thing, that the more that we can present to children in an age appropriate way the true design, they're going to have their ears tuned, so to speak, to the counterfeits, to just
that's right.
recognize, well, that's not what I learned. That's not what
Yeah.
my parents taught me, or my Sunday school or church taught me. And it's the same thing of how, the proverbial analogy of how people learn to recognize counterfeit money. They study the
Yes.
original so much so that they can immediately recognize even the smallest detail that goes against what the real thing is.
Oh, what a good reminder for us to dive into the Bible and be so
Yes.
familiar with the original design that when a counterfeit shows up, it smells like one.
Precisely, precisely.